Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. We are your host, Atlas Alex. And today we're going to be focusing on a topic which, again, comes to us this week because of our direct experience. And it is a topic which is probably not going to be very popular. We'll be surprised if we get many people showing up for today's live stream. It's something that most people either they don't want to think about, or they dismiss as being unimportant or irrelevant to them, or that it's inconsequential somehow. And we're referring to the types of temptation that we are exposed to, the modalities that our egos use to effectively get to us. What do we mean by that? In order for an ego to possess us and get us to act according to its will, its ill will, in other words, fulfilling its desires, which of course egos masquerade as I, making their desires seem like our desires. And that's why every ego presents itself as I and me and my. So what I want. It's not gluttony that wants to binge on Doritos or to have a third slice of cake. It's not gluttony that wants that. I want that. And that's how it is presented within our own psychology, within our own psyche. And on that level, it is obvious. The temptations of our egos are rather obvious that way. And that is what can give us this tendency to believe that, well, we have temptation under control. We know all about temptation. We don't need to understand that or look at that in any more depth, because we know what temptation is. We all know what that's like. And we may believe that we have our temptations under control, that we have self-control, we have self-discipline, and that even if we are tempted by XYZ, everything's fine in moderation, but then we are able to cut ourselves off and not overindulge in such temptations. But those sorts of temptations, visceral, bodily, primal temptations, those are just the tip of the iceberg. They represent the most basic, fundamental, again, primal sorts of temptations. What we are really interested in today is going deeper and peeling back the layers of subtlety, all the different ways that egos manage to tempt us, and in ways that we might not even identify or recognize that we are being tempted. Because, again, in order for egos to grab a hold of us, to enslave us, to possess us, and get us to do their will, we effectively have to be willing participants. In order for us to fulfill an ego's ill will, that ego must convince us that that ill will is our will, and we willingly fulfill it. This is the trick. This is part of the game. And this is represented very well in literature, in theater, in myth, scripture, fairy tale, science fiction, fantasy, even in cartoons, where we have the little angel and the little devil appearing on the shoulder of characters, whispering in their ear, trying to convince them to do X, Y, Z, or A, B, C. And when we observe ourselves, we listen to the voices in our head, for example, or we observe our heart center, our emotions, and our physical body. And we can observe how these thoughts and sensations and temptations arise and what forms they take. And when we are really honest with ourselves and observant of all of these different methods and modalities, we discover that temptation is far more than just, I want another slice of cheesecake, or I'm sexually attracted to this individual who happens not to be my spouse. We think in terms of temptation only in these very base levels of desire. And as we will share with you momentarily, the egos are far more subtle and far more clever and far more insidious than that. So if our understanding of temptation and our belief that we have temptation under control because we have our bodily desires under control and we have our appetites in check, that we are able to control our appetites, that's only the tip of the iceberg. And that is even a trick of the ego to get us to believe that about ourselves. I have my appetites under control, therefore I don't need to, I don't need to worry about temptation. Temptation doesn't affect me. I have my appetites under control. I don't do drugs. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't watch pornography. I don't overindulge in food or sugar or chocolate or caffeine right? We can go down this laundry list and we can create this catalog of all of the things that we don't do that we are able to control. And and we work out, we exercise, right? We watch our diet, and we don't stay up late. We go to bed early. We get up early, and we have all of these disciplines, these regimented habits that we have adopted. And because of all of that, we can say, "Aha! You see, I'm not one to fall for temptation." But that's just the surface level. That's just again, the tip of the iceberg when we talk about temptation. Before we go any further, Benjamin Ochoa says, "Hello, Attlas. Hello, Benjamin. Nice to have you join us. Nice to have you here, and nice to have all of you here today. It's always wonderful to see everyone." Let's see if we can't put pen to paper, as it were. Why don't we... What's interesting about this word, temptation, is the word tempt. It has its origins in Latin. And that word in Latin, tempt or tempt, it translates in French to time. And what's also interesting is that what's related here, temp, it's also related to temperature. And that immediately should, pose a question. How are time and temperature related? Well, we measure time in things called minutes and hours and days, etc. But on a clock, on the 12-hour clock, we measure them in minutes and hours. And really, those minutes and hours on a clock are degrees. Exactly the same way we measure degrees Celsius or degrees Fahrenheit. In other words, there's a gradation, there's a level, right, in terms of temperature. And the degree to which the mercury rises in the thermometer, we measure temperature by virtue of degrees, and we measure time by virtue of degrees of the hands of a clock. And we just arbitrarily divided that clock, we divided it into 12. We said there's 12 hours. And the hour hand goes around twice in a day, so 24 hours. So we talk about hours, and we talk about 60 minutes as the minute hand moves. The hour hand moves through this arc, this complete arc of a circle of 360 degrees. But we divide that and we just measure that 60 degrees around here. We call those degrees minutes. And then we have the other degrees, the 12, and we call those hours. But they're really degrees, because the second hand moves through all 360 degrees, even though we still say 60 seconds in a minute. It's 60 times 60, by the way. If there's 60 minutes in an hour and 60 seconds in a minute, six times six is 36. So time is all about degree. That's really where this tempt, the root word of temptation, it's all about degrees. Now, this is very interesting when we look at it, not just linguistically, but logically, practically. Because we all know when it comes to time and when it comes to temperature, degrees there are these special points when it comes to, for example, it doesn't matter if we're talking time or if we're talking temperature, but let's, for the moment, just work with temperature. We have, for example, we're going to work with Celsius, simply because for us it's easier. Not least because that's what we know Celsius. We don't know Fahrenheit very well at all. But scientifically, that's what science works with Celsius as well, not with Fahrenheit, because at 0 degrees Celsius, water freezes, right? H2O becomes ice at 0 degrees. Above 0 degrees, H2O is water. I'm gonna and at 100 degrees Celsius, we have we get steam, but we have, a vapor. Again, Canadian spelling there. So we have water vapor. Water boils at 100 degrees. So that's why science uses Celsius, because you can understand how much easier it is for chemists and physicists to work mathematically when one of the most abundant, if not the most abundant element on the planet, not element, molecule, but what's essential for life, freezes at 0 and boils at 100. So we have these pivotal moments, these pivotal degrees that things change dramatically in the nature or the state of water. But it is a question of degree. In this particular case, right, it is the application of heat, temperature, degrees of temperature that changes the state of something that is being influenced, conditioned by that temperature. Now, how does time fit in to this situation? There's two ways. First and foremost is the moment, the present moment, the now, is a question of time, this present moment. Of course, the way the rational mind understands time, we understand time in a linear sort of progression. So if temperature and heat is this upward and downward spectrum of degree, time, as the rational mind understands it, is this linear progression. And seconds and minutes and hours tick away as we progress from the past into the future. And somewhere along this line, we are in this, at the 0 point in the moment, where time stands still in the present moment. There is no time, really. It's sort of like you have above 0, you have plus X degrees, and below 0, you have minus Y degrees. That's like moments in the past are like how much minutes or hours or days negative versus how much so you have negative time and you have positive time. You have past and future. And that 0 point of 0 degrees is this present moment. But it's degrees. And it's very interesting that it is degrees that are the root of this word temptation. We have to comprehend what that really means then. How does, for example, degrees of temperature affect or condition? Well, we were looking at water. It's the perfect example. Simply because the math is easy, but also because it's something we all live with, and it's also something that nature itself must contend with. We have clouds in the sky, we have liquid water on the face of the earth, and then we have frozen ice. And depending on the degrees of temperature, conditioning that water determines the state of that water. Our psychology is very much the same. So, how does time relate to that? Well, even though we exist in the moment, an ego, all egos, all temptation presents some kind of function, which is a function of the past, or it is a function of the future. How can we test this? Can we prove this just by observing ourselves? Well, in order for egos to get what they want, which is whatever that may be, but they want us to indulge them. They say, I want this or I want that, or I don't want this and I don't want that. It's craving and aversion. But that can be proactive, forward looking. So the ego can present a desire or a craving. So I want something in the future, but it can also, so that's we would call that what? Anticipation. Anticipation, or some forward-looking desire, expectation. It's an identification and an attachment to an outcome, which is in the future. The ego presents its desire in the moment, but it leverages the degrees to which the outcome extends into the future, or into the past. So in the past, we have things like regrets, we have traumas, past pain and suffering that we carry the burden with. We relive over and over again. In the moment, we're tortured by our past. And again, this is a question of degree in terms of time, because in some cases, time heals all wounds, but in other cases, in terms of childhood trauma, some people allow childhood traumas to become deeply entrenched, and the longer they live with them, the more possessed they become by them. But this is all temptation. We are all talking about being conditioned to one degree or another. It's interesting that down here we were talking about temperature. Now, one thing about temperature is that temperature relates in our lives in a practical sense. It relates to the weather. What's one of the first things you do when you wake up in the morning or when you're preparing to get dressed or preparing to go out? You check the temperature, you check the weather. Is it sunny? Is it rainy? Is it snowing? Is it sleeting? Is it fog? But one of the most critical aspects about the weather is temperature. Because the temperature is going to directly affect what weather conditions are. Weather is subject to conditioning. In fact, weather conditions are the conditioning of the atmosphere of the earth. That is what we call weather. And the word weather, it's interesting because in the earth, we have this word in weather, which is like ether. We just have a W in front of it. It's almost like if you put an R in here, it would be earther, but it's not the earther, it's the ether. And that's the space, right? The ether is the substance, the stuff, the space. Weather conditions condition that ether. And it's what you weather, you know that expression, to weather the storm. To weather means to bear. It's the conditions that the ether bears. How temperature, for instance, affects and conditions the ether. We call it weather here on the earth. It is to bear, we get the word forbear. In other words, to impose, to lay upon, to set upon, to condition. Temperature, in this case heat, affects, conditions the mercury in the thermometer that causes it to expand and rise up the thermometer. That's the same heat which affects the water molecules and their molecular, intermolecular structure by terms of their excitability, by how much energy, their vibration, and whether or not they assume their crystalline structure, or if they break out of their crystalline structure and assume their fluidic structure, their liquid form, or if they become so excitable that they break free of the bonds of their liquid form and they become vaporous. They become a gas. They become gaseous and water vapor. All of that is the water bearing the conditioning of that temperature, of that heat. So when you bear something, you carry that weight, you carry that burden. To be conditioned is to be burdened. Do you see how we are already far removed from this kindergarten understanding of what a temptation is? When we look into just the linguistic and uh, origins of the word, why would they choose that word, meaning degree, and all of these other scientific, practical, meaningful values of that word, degree? And as it relates both to temperature and has that how temperature is able to change our state, but also time that is able to move us from the present moment, thinking about the future or thinking about the past to one degree or another. The next few moments, the next few seconds, the next few minutes, the next few hours, the next few days, the next few years in the future, or a few moments ago, a few seconds ago, minutes ago, hours ago, days ago, years ago. To what degree are we being thrown into the future or thrown into the past? And that too is a conditioning, because the mind, our consciousness, through the mind, is being thrown out of the present moment, which is the 0 point where there's no time. In the present moment, there is no time. It is always the eternal now. Now, 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 now. Time does, you cannot measure time in the eternal now. There is no time. There's only time when you think about the future or you think about the past. And time conditions the consciousness, the mind, to imagine a future or imagine a past, because the past no longer exists. It only exists in our mind. Just like the future doesn't exist, except that which we imagine or fantasize about in our mind. And just as the temperature can be said to condition, so too the mind and the consciousness via the mind becomes conditioned. And to what degree it is being conditioned sort of determines, in a metaphysical scientific sense, right? We can say degrees of temptation. Now, we now know that that expression, degrees of temptation, is redundant, because temptation itself has degrees in it. Temptation itself derives from the Latin for degree, relating to temperature and relating to time, because both of them are measured in degrees. But what else then can we understand in this way. Now, why? Okay, there we go. 1. Okay. So in esotericism, you will probably have read this before, but if not, this is going to be in our book. We can understand the sum value of our life, of our existence, on a very simple chart. 2 lines. The horizontal axis we can call the line of life, and the vertical axis we can call the line of being. But let's, it's obviously a line, so let's call it what it is. What that line represents. That line represents our level of being. And the line of life, hopefully we don't have to explain that indicates where we are in our life, from birth and death. How do we progress through life in terms of our level of being? And do we make that this sort of progress? And at each level, at each point, in our life, as we progress along the line of life, at what degree are we in terms of the level of being? You may be aware or familiar of the 33 degrees in Freemasonry. You may have heard of this 33-degree Mason. Well, what does that relate to exactly? If not the 33 vertebrae of the spinal column. And the initiations of our innermost being, as they advance in level of being, and they acquire new initiations, they are acquiring new degrees of being. Degrees of being. And when you look at a pie chart, whether you're looking at the 33 vertebrae of the spinal column, or you are looking at a circle, and you have some number of degrees, let's call that that's 25 there, so let's call that, let's say, 12 degrees, right? You have 12 degrees here. As you accumulate degrees, you become more and you become less, because that's the nature. That's the nature of the degrees of a circle. If you increase the degrees on one side, you can only do that by decreasing the degrees of the other half. So there's only one way to accumulate levels of being or degrees of being. There's only one whole that you have to work with. There's one self. You don't accrue or acquire levels of being, degrees of being, by accumulating things from outside of yourself. And if the being is purity, if the being is oneness and wholeness and unity and love and truth and all of these other some of these words that we talked about in talks back in the summer, oneness and wholeness, and we talked about emptiness and fullness, and we went through all of these different words and as they relate to ourselves in the path. Then we increase our level of being, we increase our degrees of progress by cleansing or eliminating, if you want to call, you know, negative degrees or degrees of filth or the degrees of not being. And again, coming back to our little drawing here, let's see if we can come up with something a little better here. What if we let's see, can we do a oh, they're there. So let's do a circle. No, we don't want to type on it. Can we do a no, okay. Right now, we might have a very, it won't let me erase. Ah, what a completely useless program. Okay, so let's trash this because it's completely useless for our purposes. We're gonna have to do our best and just go with that. Okay. We might have a very small little sliver, okay, of being, and then all of this garbage, all of this filth, all of this crap, all of this darkness, all of this shadow. Okay, we have a word for this. We call it our egos. And we might have this tiny little, sliver of light, of being. Because we're mostly this. We're mostly not being. Oops. We have many, many, many degrees of not being. So we're actually down here somewhere. So we wanted to, you know, be accurate. You know, we're somewhere here. We have very few degrees of being because we have so many degrees of not being. Because what we do is we subtract, right? The degrees of being, the degrees of not being from the degrees of being, and that's what we end up with, this mathematical equation of where we are, what is our level of being. It's what's the degrees of being that we have minus the degrees of not being. And the degrees of not being are our egos. That's the shadow. Benjamin says, that gives us inner and outer, day and night. Uh, that also gives us inner and outer and day and night. Um, no, not in this context. In the context of time, we have day and night cycles and so on and so forth, but that's related. You can look at that as an allegory, but we're not talking about the same thing. So we're talking about levels of being and degrees of being and not being. We're talking about the continuum of the Tao within our own life. This is the metaphysical mathematical equation of where we are in our life. And how we calculate that is, you know, the amount of consciousness we have subtracted, and subtract from that the amount of consciousness which is bottled up inside of the egos. And that's what determines ultimately where we are in terms of our level of being. Are we here? Are we here? But it's a question of degrees. To what degree are we conscious? And to what degree are we unconscious? To what degree are we ruled by our subconscious? It's all about degrees. And that's why you have this terminology in the Masons referring to a 33-degree Master Mason, one who has risen to the level of the 33rd degree because they have eliminated that's what that should mean. They've eliminated so much of their ego that now all of this is conscious. Now, they haven't eliminated all of their ego. And of course, where the Masons are concerned, this is, problematic to begin with. But um, we're just sharing with you the esoteric origins of what 33-degree Freemason, what that means in theory, what it's supposed to mean. But this is the only way to increase in levels of in degrees of being and the level of being, is to eliminate, reduce the degrees of filth, the degrees of not being. Because to be or not to be is the question. But as we point out in our book, it's not an on-off switch. It's not a question of being or not being. There are degrees of being and there are degrees of not being. Tiffany asks a question here. She says, first of all, Tiffany, uh, welcome. That yours is a name we don't recognize. So welcome, welcome. We're happy to have you here. Do our egos equate in any way to the creation of physical matter? And if so, does this work in reverse as well? Do our egos equate in any way to the creation of physical matter? And if so, does this work in reverse as well? If we understand your question, egos, if we understand your question, egos are metaphysical in nature. They're not physical. And they can condition matter. They can affect matter. And they can, through black magic, they can influence and they can manipulate matter. They are certainly concerned with matter. For example, egos concern themselves with the accumulation of certain types of matter. Egos concern themselves with the physical body a lot. But when you ask, do our egos equate in any way to the creation of physical matter? Your question is a little ambiguous. It's not entirely clear what exactly do you mean. Do you mean in the creation of the universe? As in when God created the universe, egos are related to that physical universe? Because egos are metaphysical. They affect, obviously, the physical universe, but they do not exist within the physical universe. And does this work in reverse as well? Now, it works in reverse insofar as what we're describing here in this process of eliminating egos, we release consciousness because egos enslave consciousness. So when we talk about alchemy and transmuting the lead of ego into the gold of the human soul, the gold of the solar bodies, we're talking about creation of solar bodies, which are clearly not physical. They're metaphysical. But that creative process, we're getting the substance, which is metaphysical substance. It's not matter, it's metaphysical substance. We're recovering that from egos by eliminating the egos. So it does relate to the creation of metaphysical matter, our solar bodies, through the elimination of egos. And the egos certainly want us to remain identified with our physical body, but they're not directly related to the creation of physical matter, if that makes any sense. So Tiffany follows up and she asks, is ego in any way the shadow side of God? Yes. Egos work for mechanical nature. Egos, so okay, when you're asking about physical matter, it's not physical matter you're asking about, it's the density of being, the density of energy. So if physical matter is a coagulation, a condensation of energy, there are metaphysical levels of reality that are denser and heavier than the physical spectrum of light. So yes, egos relate to that density, and that's why we referred over here the relationship between conditioning and weather as a burden, right? To have this imposed, to have to weather the storm means to bear the storm. So we bear our egos, and you know this from your own experience. Anybody who has traumas bears their traumas and bears their shame. They bear their guilt. They bear their conscience, right? The sins that they've committed. They have to carry that as a burden. So um, so in that sense, yes, your question is, you're on the right track by saying, is it related to physical matter? Because physical matter, let's face it, physical matter relates to mechanical nature. And in animals, the egos are how animals function, right? Because animals are mechanical. So they function on fear, on gluttony, on lust, right? It's how the natural world on the mechanical levels of nature operate and function. And that's what egos work for. So they definitely are on the denser levels of the spectrum. And as we go on the tree of life into those denser levels, the further and further you go down into uh, the lunar astral plane, or the lower astral plane, which we call Klipoth, which is also called hell, the denser and denser it becomes, and the stronger and stronger, the the further in negative degrees that the egos become. We call them demons. We call them all sorts of negative entities, and they're very mechanical, and they're very ruthless in their mechanicity, because the more mechanical something is, the less conscious it is, the less it has a conscience, the less empathetic, the more controlling it wants to be. Benjamin says, matter is energy, just like Einstein's infamous equation E equals mc squared. Our egos direct this energy through our consciousness by focusing our attention. That's correct. So when we talk about matter, we're, of course, matter is an illusion, right? There is no matter as such. Everything just exists in the field of consciousness anyway. Everything exists in the mind. So what we're talking about is energy that has been slowed, that has been conditioned. And it is the degree to which it has been condensed. And on various different planes, on various different levels, the condensation of that, or coagulation of that energy, forms these planes of reality. And we are existing right now on the third dimensional plane that we are conscious of, that we are aware of. But we are also existing on the metaphysical plane, then, of the fifth dimension and the sixth dimension, where consciousness is. But bottled up consciousness is in the lunar fifth dimension, is in hell, is in our subconscious mind, because it's bottled up inside of egos. And that's what this diagram relates to, and what the whole level of being, or the degrees of being and degrees of not being, relate to. To what degree are we being conditioned, and to what degree is that, are we weathering those conditions? That means carrying that burden on our soul and our psyche, on our consciousness. All of that weight. When you carry weight, you're covered by it. So all of that weightiness, that mass, right? If you can imagine it that way, as a mass around you, around your consciousness is trapped inside of a mass, and that's holding you down on this as you go through life. It's a burden. So when we talk about enlightenment, we are talking about removing that which burdens us, which conditions us, which causes us to not be, because we are, in our core, we have our true self But then around, encasing our true self are all these layers and levels of falseness, of ego that we identify with. And one of those layers is the physical body and the personality and our fears and our desires, our lust, our greed, our envy, all these things that call themselves I. Our many eyes. And they are like layers on an onion. And somewhere inside is our true self, our true being. But all of this mass is weighing us down. It's conditioning us and causing us not to be. It's preventing us to acquire these degrees of being. And so the process of enlightenment is shedding all of this, all of these layers, one by one by one. And as we shed that, as we go through life, right, there's less holding us back and holding us down, and we become, our soul becomes lighter. We are being held back and held down to a lesser and lesser degree. Our consciousness is bottled up in our egos to a lesser and lesser degree. So as it becomes liberated, then we have a greater degrees of free consciousness. We have greater degrees of being, of knowing ourselves as our being. We become lighter, and that's something that we've all experienced to one degree or another, the lightness of being. That being liberated from the great weight and burdens of our egos, and we achieve that lightness. And that's what enlightenment is. Because that's what light is. Light is the absence of darkness. It's the absence of all that shadow and all that burden, all that mass that's pulling us down, that's trying to control us and trying to get us to control everybody else. The light has no desire to control in that way. We have a few more comments here. Tiffany says, one last question then. Do you know at what point or at what degree ego entered the playing field as a tool for the abstract absolute? That's an interesting question. As a phenomenon, the ego ultimately works. The ego is the Black Lodge. And as a phenomenon, it ultimately works for the White Lodge. It entered the playing field the moment the universe was created. Because you have to comprehend the Tao. And you have to comprehend that there is absolutely no reason to play a game if you have no adversary. If there's nothing to challenge you. If there's no opposition. You cannot know what it means to be. You cannot know yourself unless you are confronted with that which opposes and challenges you. This is why chess has the checkerboards, the checkered board, and you have the pieces, the white and black pieces. It's absolutely pointless to embark on any endeavor. You cannot know yourself. You cannot know what you are capable of. You do not know what your limits are. and you have absolutely no way, shape, or form at all whatsoever with which to grow and develop without some obstacle to overcome, without someone or something to challenge you. This is in our book, of course, but we show it here because we've shown it. I don't know how many times we've shown it, but it's worthwhile showing again and again and again and again. Where did it go? There. Okay, life is baffling. What brings water, what makes water come alive are baffles. Turbulence. Baffles, what are baffles? Baffles create turbulence in the flow of water and in the flow of life. Without turbulence, life becomes stagnant, motionless, purposeless, and becomes putrid and putrefied and pointless. Like standing water that just becomes a breeding ground for algae and bacteria and mosquitoes. It just becomes this breeding ground for for parasitic entities to feed on. It's not vibrant, it's not alive, it's not fresh. It can't dissolve anything, it can't carry dissolved minerals. It can't provide any, it can't provide like life to positive entities. It can only provide life to destructive, entropic forms of life and parasitic forms of life, like mosquitoes and whatnot. That's what stagnant water is, right? So Tiffany says, she follows up, she says, okay, I suspected this, but I never sought confirmation. And she says, so God created a disturbance within itself, so to speak. God created the absolute in accordance with the Tao, in accordance with the Alm of life, created the circumstances by which it can know itself and by which it can accumulate that knowledge and know itself in all its myriad forms. And that includes the forms which challenge and oppose and obstruct, and what's more than that, opposes and seeks to twist, tempt, corrupt, and make fall all that is good, pure, and of the light. You have to have an adversary, and that's the Arabic and Hebrew word shaitan. That's what that means. It means adversary. Hang on, we just jump back here a moment. Where are we? Okay. Let's see if we can bring that up. Okay. So all of this negative, this conditioning and everything else, it's called shaitan, but that just means adversary in Hebrew and in Arabic. So when we face life, it's like when we play chess, your opponent is your adversary, but not your enemy. Okay? Opponent does not mean enemy. And when you comprehend the Alm of life in your own life, you realize that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And the adversary, these egos. Now, having said that, this is an important caveat. Having said that, in order for the adversary to be an effective opponent, and we're going to use the example of chess. Okay, on the board, we have your chess pieces. We're going to do a queen there. Oh, we're not even going to. I'm not going to try a knight. On the board, your opponent's pieces, they have to be ruthless. We can say existentially or philosophically or theoretically or however we want to express it, that our opponent is our adversary but not our enemy. But on the board, where the rubber meets the road, our opponent's pieces are ruthless and they behave ruthlessly. This is our queen. She's the most powerful, the most valuable piece that we have. And every piece that our opponent has wants to take our queen from us. Our queen is our divine mother, Devi Kundalini Shakti. In other words, she is our sexual force, our sexual energy. Egos covet and crave sexual energy above everything else. Oh, and our consciousness. Our consciousness is our king. So between the king and the queen, I'll just draw them in the background there. So our king is our consciousness. When you play chess, your opponent is going to be trying to corner your queen, take your queen, and checkmate your king. In other words, trap your king, steal your consciousness, and take your sexual energy. This is what the opponent, the adversary, is playing out. And the pieces on the board are relentless and they are ruthless. And they have to be. They have to be. They are by design this way. And what's really interesting, you know what? Let's not go too far in advance because there's a couple questions or comments here. Benjamin says, that's why in Scripture we are admonished to seek the kingdom of heaven, which we can do if we direct our attention inward, because the kingdom of heaven is within. The outer world is an illusion. That's correct. And one of the ways that the egos, our opponent, our adversary, tempts us, is it tempts us with everything out there. It tempts us to continually focus our attention, our consciousness out there and on physical things and on superficial things. Doesn't want us looking inside because A lot of the machinations, a lot of the ways in which it actually gets its way with us is within. But it keeps our attention focused out there, and that's like, when the cat's away, the mouse can play. If the egos have our attention always focused outside and focused on the world and focused on all these other things, and keeping us blaming everybody and everything else out in the world for all of our problems, well, guess what? It can continue causing all of our problems, and we'll never know it, because it has us, playing the victim and playing the blame game. But as Benjamin said, right, the ego is there to oppose us, our true self, our individuated essence of God, our individual intimate Christ, who longs to return triumphant where? To the kingdom of heaven, which is likewise within. And the egos are here as the opponent, as our adversary, ruthlessly and relentlessly seeking to oppose and block and obstruct and derail and sabotage, and every single conceivable possible verb you can imagine of a negative nature, to prevent our innermost hero from completing their heroic journey of descending down here into hell and liberating itself and helping to liberate others, and to return triumphant into heaven with new knowledge of self, newfound self-knowledge. What was I capable of? What was I able to do? It's like every time you play a game of chess, you learn something, you gain experience. Benjamin says, consciousness, I like to think, is the currency of the egos. They use our energy and our consciousness. Consciousness to egos is our energy is our energy. So we have our sexual energy. That, you might say, is the lifeblood of egos. That's, in that sense, that's a currency. But you're right, in consciousness to them is very valuable, because it is through the consciousness that they possess that gives them sentience. Without our conscience, they can't achieve sentience. They're only purely mechanical. And this is a very interesting debate that's going on right now in AI. Will AI ever achieve sentience? Well, it will. It has already within all of us. So it can achieve sentience through cybernetics. When they start implanting chips in people's brains, then those chips have AI on them, or those AI chips are taken over by AI, they will have a sentient being potentially under their control, and they will potentially be able to filter and harness that sentience for themselves. That's exactly how the ego operates, already inside of all of us. We explain all this in our book. Azazel says, one could say that the queen is the most ruthless as well. The queen has to be. The whole point of us sharing this is that remember, in chess, what makes chess such a powerful analogy or allegory for life is we have to comprehend that here we drew a pawn, right? So let's be, if we were, let's see if we can do this. Let's see if we can grab this and Control D and then grab them. Okay. It'd be really nice if I could do a fill of some kind. Let's see if we can do this. Okay, so let's take our king and queen, because when you play chess, the reality is that you are playing an opponent that has all the same pieces that you do. Well, what does that mean esoterically for us? What's the significance of that? The significance of that is the egos want our consciousness and our sexual energy because this is their lifeblood and this is their currency, as Benjamin pointed out. Okay, but it's conditioned. But it's once they have it, these pieces give them power and give them power over us. And once they have it, they want more. The why it is in Genesis that it's Eve who tempts Adam, and it's the serpent who tempts Eve, and the serpent represents the Kundalini. And that's because the sexual energy, it's just the energy of creation. It is also the energy of destruction. You can create, you can destroy. If we come up here and we're talking about being and not being, see all these levels, all these layers? These were created. These were created. How are they created? They were created with the only force, the only energy that exists in the universe that is capable of creation. And that's the sexual force. But the sexual force applied negatively, applied mechanically. So, for example, you have literally, let's take the sexual force. The potential to create life and have that applied mechanically, unconsciously, through the ego of lust that wants a particular outcome. And you have the sexual force flowing, right, down and out. And what do you create? You create more desire, you create more lust, and potentially you create another intellectual animal. Through the act of orgasm, you can impregnate someone. You can potentially create another, we won't call them a human being, we'll call them what they are, an intellectual animal. Because true human beings are not created this way. Or that sexual force can be raised up the spinal column. In that same act, but not working with lust, working with love, positively, consciously, not mechanically, consciously. We can create with that same force the solar bodies. And we can eliminate lust. We can eliminate all comprehended egos. So we can erase more of this darkness, more of this shadow, and liberate more consciousness. In other words, we can raise ourselves a number of degrees in terms of being, on the line of being. And we can reduce the conditioning by degrees of not being. And the energy then flows up an atom, up an atom, up an atom, up an Adam, the primordial hermaphrodite male that God created in his own image, the perfected human being, a true human being, one who is created or is creating their solar bodies because they're working with the most powerful force in the universe, the creative force, the sexual force. That's the power of God, the power to create and destroy. So when we talk about temptation, this is what we're talking about, really. We're talking about, then that's why the word temptation is all about degrees. And that Master Samael had this great quote that also talks about degrees. He says, in order for that which must be dissolved to dissolve, and that which must be crystallized to crystallized, the water must boil at 100 degrees. Let's draw those. Why can't we draw a 0 without making it look like a 6? Okay, there we go. 100 degrees. In order for that which must crystallize to be crystallized and that which must be dissolved to dissolve, the water must boil at 100 degrees. That's, of course, the boiling point of water. But here he's not talking about physical water. He was talking allegorically here, and he's talking about the sexual waters. So, in order for us to work intelligently with the sexual force must be put into activity. What happens to water when it boils? What did we talk about earlier when we talk about baffles? We talked about what do baffles create, right? Baffles create turbulence. And water comes alive through turbulence. But it's not just baffles that create turbulence. What makes our sexual waters come alive, if not the act of sex itself? And uniting masculine and feminine polarities of the sexual waters, of the sexual force. And when you bring the masculine and feminine together in an alchemical union, and there is real chemistry, we use these words for a reason, the sexual waters begin to awaken and they begin to become turbulent as they are heated up. There is heat, there is fire, because there's fire in those waters. And the fire of sexual attraction, that fire that we feel when we are united with one whom we love in the sexual act, applies the heat and it raises the degrees. And it causes sexual waters to boil, to become turbulent. And it is in that turbulence of water, under those conditions, that water can dissolve. The power of water to dissolve increases exponentially. And the ability for water to form crystals increases exponentially. Not crystals of water, but crystals of other elements. You can use boiling water to create crystals, or you can use boiling water to dissolve solids. And this is why Master Samael preferred this allegory when talking about the dissolving egos and crystallizing the solar bodies. The water must boil at 100 degrees. It only happens in the sexual act. When the masculine and feminine polarities of the sexual force cause the sexual waters to boil at 100 degrees, we call this awakening or awakened kundalini. But metaphysically, we can understand it alchemically as the waters boiling. So these people who talk about awakening kundalini and others awakening their kundalini, and so it's all nonsense. It's all nonsense. Kundalini awakens in the sexual act. Kundalini awakens when it is awakened by the union of masculine and feminine polarities of the energy and the water bringing to a boil. Now, here's the trick. Here's the catch. We want the water to boil at 100 degrees. We need the fire. We need to raise the temperature. But when we're working with fire, there are two different ways in which we can work with fire. The first, we're going to draw the first one down here, is fire can flame out. It can burn itself out. It can go out in a blaze of glory, right? We can have an explosion. And all of the heat and all of the energy it just dissipated and flames out. In a you know, we've all experienced that. If you have ever tried to barbecue something or cook something, you know that this is a non-starter. You can't get anywhere. Whatever you're using for fuel, if it just flames out, it uses up all the fuel in a matter of moments, you know that flames are an incredibly inefficient use of that fuel. It's dissipating the heat and energy far too quickly to be of any use, to be of any value if you're trying to cook something or if you're trying to boil water. What we want is the second application of fire. Slow, steady application of heat. In other words, if you're barbecuing something, what you want are hot coals. In the slow, steady application of heat, you bring the water up to a boil. And you can sustain that boiling water at that boiling point, the simmering point, while it slowly dissolves what needs to be dissolved and crystallizes what needs to be crystallized. You can't do that with flame outs and and explosions of fire. You can't cook anything with that. You can't boil anything with that. You certainly can't crystallize, and you certainly can't dissolve. Because we're working with fire and water here. And if you've ever tried barbecuing with flame outs and flame ups, you know that all you can do is scorch the meat, and the meat will be bone cold raw in the center, and outside it'll be burnt to a crisp. It's a complete catastrophe. Again, this is a question of degrees. It's a question of degree. Like, even if, like, when you turn up the heat on your stove, or that you turn up the flames on your barbecue, this is all a question of degrees, of intensity, and managing and pacing. And we can go back over here to our level of being over time, line of life. And you see this nice gradual slope, this nice gradual increase. Very often people want to be enlightened like this. They want instant gratification. But the thing is that the being has no such desires for instant anything. We have this little saying, maybe you've heard it before. Let's we have a whole bunch of comments we have to get to here. Benjamin says, yeah, the Divine Mother, she's both in Yesod and Malkuth. That's two matrices of hell. And Azazel says, wouldn't be too incorrect to attribute the Black Queen to Lilith then? Yeah, the point of sharing this is the fact that the egos, we can put that here, the adversary, right? Our egos, or the Black Lodge, use our very consciousness and sexual energy against us to defeat us. That's why in chess you have black pieces that are the same as the white pieces. They're not different pieces. They're exactly the same. They can do exactly the same things as the white pieces can. This is expressed in Star Wars when Yoda is instructing, was it Yoda instructing Luke, or I can't remember now, when he says or was it Obi-Wan Kenobi? I can't remember, but they say the Sith and the Jedi are like, no, it's actually Emperor Palpatine. It's Darth Sidious is instructing Anakin Skywalker when he says the Sith and the Jedi are alike in almost every single way. The Sith and the Jedi use the same force. It's just how they use it. And as Yoda tells Luke, when Luke asks him, is the dark side stronger? And he says, no, quicker, easier, more seductive. Quicker, easier, more seductive. Quicker, easier, more seductive. What does that sound like over here? When we talk about lust and we talk about outcomes, we use that desiring a certain outcome, and we use this word specifically because the pun is intended here. What's quicker, easier, and more seductive in the act of sex? Working intelligently with the Divine Mother Kundalini, with patience, or working slow and steady with hot coals to slow and steady bring that water to a boil and dissolve and crystallize. How does most of the world work with their sexual energy? And what do they create when they do that? And a desire for outcomes, literally. And you have an entire industry in the new age that talks about manifesting your desires and getting the outcome that you want. That's black magic. And what do you harness when you're practicing black magic? If not the creative force, the sexual force, the power to create. And you're only doing that because you want certain outcomes. This is why in Buddhism, Buddha said desire is the root of all suffering. Desire is the cause of all suffering. Let's come back to chess for a moment. The consciousness is king. Okay? But in order for the king to sire an heir, he needs his queen. So the king and queen sire their children who inherit the throne. But the king is also called sire. Royalty is called sire. And what do egos want? What does lust want? What is the word that we use to describe that? Their cravings and their aversions? Desire. They want consciousness, which is the king, and they want sexual energy, which is the queen. They want to desire us. They want to desire our being from the throne within us. Because our being sits upon the throne until, because of desire, because of temptation, because of degrees, we begin to follow the ill will of our egos and not our being. To desire means not to be. Do you see that? If being means to be, then to desire the being means not to be. This is a mathematical absolute truism. This is not up for debate. You cannot debate this. Try to debate me on this. Feel free. You cannot do it without breaking every single rule of logic and mathematics and reality. You will break philosophy itself. The entire, all of reality has to break down before this becomes false. What we just shared with you. And why the most important words ever uttered in the English language were Hamlet's to be or not to be speech. And why Buddha Shakyamuni nailed it when he said desire is the cause of all suffering. And why chess is the ultimate allegory for life. Because you have the king and the queen who sire the Christ. The consciousness and the sexual force is the only way to awaken and self-realize the innermost intimate Christ within us. The Divine Mother, Devi Kundalini Shakti, must rise up the spinal column and unite with her husband, the Holy Spirit, the masculine aspect, in order for our innermost intimate Christ, the divine androgen, to be born. The king and queen sire their offspring, who's the Son of God, that intimate Christ within us that exists within us in potentiality, but it is bottled up by all of these layers which must be dissolved. And in order for the supernal vehicles which must be crystallized to be crystallized. And what stands, and all of this is just a question of degrees. In other words, it's a matter of temptation. We haven't even started talking about the kinds of temptation yet. But all of this needs to be comprehended before you can begin to understand what temptation is. But everybody thinks they've got temptation under control. Everybody thinks they have a handle on what temptation is. Temptation is nothing short of what you see here. The great battle for the souls of humanity between the forces of good and evil, which we use those in air quotes, right? The forces of divinity and mechanicity. The forces within us which long to be, and the forces within us which by divine design, by divine purpose, are there to get us through desire, through degrees of temptation, to not be. To use our very sexual energy and consciousness against us. And to show us, to give us the means by which we can accumulate the knowledge of just how terrible and monstrous we can be when we are not being, when we are falling for temptation, when we are falling into desire, and we are being desirous. You know, serendipitously, we were listening to the history of Islam, and Cyrus was this great Shah of Persia. This legendary, held among the highest esteem to this day by the Iranians, who of course was the ancient Persians, the descendants of the ancient Persians. And Cyrus, this great king, did all of these wonderful things, and it liberated the Jews from the Jewish slaves from Persia, and many other things for the people. He was a great king, Cyrus. And it's interesting that the word Cyrus, essentially, if sire relates to the king and queen and being a king and that kingliness, Cyrus relates to that. And of rule, but not just rule, but benevolent rule. And so when we are not that, when we're the opposite of that, we are desirous. We are being ruled by our egos. We are not being ruled by our innermost king, our inner God. And this great king Cyrus is he's not revered in any kind of divine sense, but he certainly was considered to have been guided by higher powers in his rule. And it's just interesting how all the language, it doesn't matter what, we look at these different languages that have their own language trees and everything else, and it can't be coincidence. And then you can have this, you can bring in this other thing that Azazel mentioned earlier about the Black Queen and about the dual nature of the sexual energy. And that is that in Homer, in the Iliad and the Odyssey, you have the sirens. The sirens which tempt the, now who's the we're so terrible with names. Anyway, the hero of the Iliad and the Odyssey, the sirens tempt them, right? And the sirens, there's 3 of them. And they're sirens because it's a sexual force. It's the queen in each of the 3 brains which tempts us. Because, again, we cannot develop, we cannot grow without being tested, without being tempted. We cannot raise degrees in level of being unless we are challenged by the forces that are weighing us down. We cannot grow muscle unless we lift weight. And in the lifting of the weight, we tear muscle tissue and we grow stronger. Or we stimulate the muscles to grow because of the weight that we're lifting, weightiness. So this is why ultimately our opponent is our adversary, but not our enemy. But they're ruthless and relentless in their pursuit and their desire for our consciousness and sexual energy, because they want to sire over us by desiring our being. There's so many different ways that the words in the language, because there's a reason why magic is called spelling, right? Cast a spell, because the power of language cannot be and should not be understated. And we must not fall into the trap of contemporary critical theory and contemporary linguistics, which says that all language is arbitrary, and that these arbitrary symbols and signs are completely arbitrary. They're meaningless. They're pointless. That's not true. And every single time we set ourselves to this whiteboarding in one of our lectures, all kinds of stuff appear that even we never even realized, we've never even seen before. And it's only when you start actually writing the words out and you're saying, oh my gosh, this is this and that's that, and this relates to that and that relates to that, and all of a sudden you can map it all out there because you can see it and you can see the relationships and you can see the magic that is behind everything that's taking place, and that these are not coincidences. These are not coincidences. Boy, that we just got off on I suppose a tangent perhaps, but let's continue with some of these comments. Okay, so that was the the Black Queen to Lilith. Okay, if such, it has helped us to realize then that the relation between the Black King and the Black Queen. It helped us to realize then the relation between the Black King and the Black Queen. Well, the Black King is the consciousness that is bottled up inside of ego, because the black pieces are defending their king just as we are defending ours. The difference is when we act from the place of our innermost, we act without fear. But the adversary acts entirely out of fear, the desire to out of fear and the desire to control, because they fear death because they can die, whereas our innermost cannot die, not in the same sense that egos can. And so as we've talked about before, Lilith has a cohort, a counterpart, a companion, and Lilith's companion is Asmodeus, which is fear. Lust and fear are the king and queen of all egos. They rule the board of the Black Lodge. Fear and lust are the Black Lodge, because even before you can have pride, you have to have the self-preservation instinct. The self-preservation comes before self-adulation and promulgation, right? To the perpetuation of the species, the perpetuation of the bloodline, for instance, comes before self-aggrandizement, because immortality, to live forever, comes even before self-adulation and recognition and all the rest of it. So fear and lust come before even pride. Even though we associate pride with the I of ego, fear and lust are far more primal, and all other egos are subservient to that. Because someone will, just about everyone will choose lust over pride, and will choose self-preservation over pride. If you had your choice between saving face or saving your life, which do you choose? Unless you're really, really, really narcissistic. And some people are, and really ashamed and really everything else. And then those people, well, in some cases, a lot of those people will take their own life. If they're so ashamed, they're so filled with self-loathing. And then those are people who fall into, for example, self-destructive patterns of addiction and so on and so forth. So it is possible to have that out of balance, out of whack. But in general, what we are looking at is the king and queen of the board are Lilith and Asmodeus. That's lust and fear. They are the king and queens. They're the mother and father of all egos. Because everything, if lust is desire, and everything else, even fear, is a child of lust, right? The desire to live, the desire to have control over outcomes. But they're very, very connected. Like they're really two sides of the same coin. Because all other desires are, like every desire is a desire for outcome. And the desire to control outcomes, it's just desire with fear conditioned also by fear. So it's an added layer to desire. Benjamin says, it fits perfectly, I know. Not sure to what he was referring to. As Asbel says, same. Unfortunate circumstances have made that clear. And Benjamin said, one could say also Kundalini awakens with a sexual thought or feeling. No, not in the same way. Not in the same way. It does to a degree, but not to the same degree. Okay, so again, when we talk about degrees, it's important because let's come back to our handy, okay? Kundalini, just like consciousness, can awaken negatively. The whole point is when we begin the sexual act, Kundalini awakens negatively because it's awakening with lust, right? That's the reality of the situation, is that lust is what's making the Kundalini awaken, but it's awakening negatively. We must, through the course of white tantra and sexual alchemy, transmute that lust into love. That's why we have the expression making love. So let's just go and okay, so we begin, okay, we begin down here. We have the, let's say we have the coming together of masculine and feminine, okay? But we begin down here with lust. Over the course of practicing alchemy, we slowly take this and transmute it. Now, if you are visualizing or fantasizing about lustful images and pornography and whatnot or so forth, your Kundalini is going to remain awoken negatively. And you will only create more lustful images and more fantasies and more desire, because you will be down here in desire. We want to get up here in the positive frequency band. That's why we call it making love. And we call it alchemy, where we transmute the lead of ego, the lead of lust, the lead of desire, into the gold of the solar bodies. And we make love. We make love. We make gold from lead. This is the hidden truth of alchemy. So we must be careful of people who are promising Kundalini awakening and all this kind of stuff, because how are they exactly achieving that? And if they're achieving it through black magic, if they're achieving it through mechanical means, and it doesn't become a conscious act, then and let's be honest, this is not easy. This is not a mechanical process. It is not easy to be engaged in sexual union with your partner and be praying to your individual divine mother and be conscious and present and aware and working with hot coals and preventing the flare out, the explosion, to sustain awakened Kundalini while not succumbing to the outcomes of lust, which is constantly trying to intervene and constantly trying to desire the process, derail the process, right? Trying to get desire in there to kick our innermost being and our divine mother off the throne, off the chessboard. Checkmate. Stuart says, oh, we just realized we've been drawing for half an hour and you guys haven't seen anything because we haven't had it on screen. Uh, okay, well, this is what we were drawing. Uh, Stuart says, there is one thing the white side can do that the black side can't in a chess game. Stuart, are you still there? What's the one thing that the white side can do that the black side can't do in a chess game? And Joanne says, oh, I made it finally to one of your live shows. Oh, hello, Joanne. Nice to have you. You made it just in time for one of our notorious and colossal flubs. We were sitting here drawing on our whiteboard, explaining everything that we were just talking about, and then we didn't actually have it. You guys couldn't actually see it. We could see it, but we were so focused over here, we sometimes forget to look at what you can see because we can. Um, anyway, technical difficulties. We were having a Microsoft moment. At least you know. At least you know. We will never claim being infallible. I don't know how much you guys missed. Did you miss all this part too? No, I don't know. Who knows? I have to go back and check the recording and see what was missed and what was not missed. Anyway, Benjamin says, I agree. It's the same force, one chessboard. And Joanne says, well, that's a powerful revelatory word. Yes. And she says, can we do this without a partner? And that's the answer that we were trying to get to here, is that we explained it. Hopefully you can see the visual now that says that, is that Kundalini can awaken negatively. And in order to remain aroused, if you require to maintain fantasies, lustful images, and so on, in order to remain aroused, in order to keep the water boiling, to keep the Kundalini awakened, your Kundalini is going to be awakening negatively. You're going to be creating more lustful images. That's why pornography is so damaging, right? Because if you if you're looking at pornography and trying to awaken Kundalini, your creative forces are going to be crystallizing more pornography, more lust in your psychology. So masturbation is not a feasible, useful way to awaken Kundalini. However, having said that, there is a way. There is a way. That way, we've shared on our live streams before, but we'll share it again. Bear with us a moment here. We have to pull up a browser window. Okay. We'll make ourselves a little smaller here. And we'll go to our okay. What is on the screen now is the following link, and we put it in the comments, but it's here on the screen as well. Okay. So you go to glorian.org and do search for the rites of rejuvenation. There's a book on this. You can get the book if you want the book, but all of them are here online. Okay. They have all the chapters, and you can go through. Each one is explained, all the rites. Now, the sixth rite is what's called the Vairoli Mudra, which is here. Okay. The sixth rite, the Vairoli Mudra, transmutation for bachelors and bachelorettes. We are not going to go over this now. We've shared with you the link. We've shared with you the resource. You can go and see this for yourself and read it. There's a different technique for women than there is for men. So that's important to get across right away. And it's important that you read this carefully and look into it and treat it with the utmost of reverence and respect, because we are dealing with your divine mother Kundalini. We're dealing with the creative force of the universe. We're dealing with the feminine aspect of your innermost Christ. So it's not to be trifled with. Also, it is beneficial to practice this as part of the rites of rejuvenation. So we do not recommend uh, practicing the Vairoli Mudra on its own outside of the rites of rejuvenation. Why is that important? Because all of the rites of rejuvenation prepare one's bodies for the transmutation process. Because in all of the rites, yes, there are yogic poses that you do, but there's also conscious prayer and devotion, but also the the siring over your physical body and your metaphysical bodies. They're lording over nature, your own nature, which is your right to do so, which is why these are rights. Okay? Remember what we said about language and spelling and magic. You have the right to lord over your mechanical nature. But you, being your innermost being, is your innermost lord and master. You have the right to rule and command mechanical nature. This is what the sacred rites of rejuvenation are all about. And attuning the consciousness to that process, making that a conscious process, and to rule over mechanical nature, to tell your body what to do, and to put mechanical nature in its place is essential when it comes to transmutation of the sexual force. And that's how, from just a general overview, from a conscious perspective, it is important to do the Vairoli Mudra, the 6th and 7th rites, within the context of the rites of rejuvenation. We got a wow surprised emoji from Tiffany, and we imagine this may have been when we were well, we don't know when it was 3:48. That was what, half an hour ago, so we don't know exactly what we were sharing. Benjamin says, you are right, language is magical, similar to a computer program. The language contains the code to program a function. Language is a potent conditioning tool used ever since the ancient priesthood. So where there's white magic, there's also black magic. And absolutely, and like we said before, the Black Lodge and the White Lodge, the signs and the symbols they use, the same symbols, they're symbols of power. Power is power. Power can be applied positively, power can be applied negatively. This is why the Germans in the 30s used this symbol called the swastika, which was an ancient symbol of power. It's just it's the symbol of Christ, an ancient symbol of Christic power, the Christic force. And they invoke that, they use that symbol on their flag and on their tanks and on their airplanes. They put the iron cross on their airplanes. And so many people today, because of Freemasonry and the Illuminati and this and that and the other thing, they have all kinds of negative connotations about the compass and square and the all-seeing eye and all of these other Masonic symbols. They all have this negativity applied to them, because that's what people have been conditioned to believe, because evil people have been using these powerful signs and symbols to for their own interests. But there's nothing inherently evil about those symbols. Now, There are exceptions to that rule. For example, the pentagram. An upright pentagram means a certain thing. An upside down pentagram means its reverse. But there's nothing inherently evil about the pentagram as such. But many Christians, they see a pentagram and they freak out because they think it's demonic. They don't know that in order for the pentagram to be demonic, it has to be turned upside down, depicting the fallen man, the fallen Kundalini, the inverted energy, the inverted sexual force. But yes, it's all magic, and it's like you said, Benjamin. It's all code, and it all has the power to manipulate and alter reality, because the reality ultimately is based on that code. Every aspect of reality, long before we talk about energy and electromagnetism, the fourth dimension, fifth dimension, mind, emotion, all that stuff, we have the world of archetypes. And all of these codes, all of these spells, all this magic exists in the world of archetypes. As Azazel says, the presentation was out of frame. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. So that's what he was saying. Yeah. And Tiffany says, is there any time in history where a guru was able to raise someone's kundalini, let alone hundreds of people? No. And that's, I think this is where we realized that you guys couldn't see what was on screen. So no, was there any time in history where a guru was able to raise someone's kundalini? No. Not positively. Are there black magic things that can be done to awaken kundalini negatively? Of course. You experience them all the time. If you've ever gone to a rock concert, or if you've ever gone to a Christian revival, Bible thumping, what do you call it? A sermon by televangelist in one of those mega churches where there's 80,000 born again Christians crammed into a stadium, and you see people passing out in the aisles. They're having what they believe to be religious experiences. Their kundalini is being awakened negatively. Now, they're not experiencing it as an orgasm, but any type of euphoria which is created in the body, either in the mind, in the heart, somewhere, or causing some kind of like convulsions, or because you can have orgasms in other parts of the body. And many people think that because they're having an orgasm in the brain, or they're having an orgasm in the heart, that they're having some kind of divine experience. But no, their kundalini is being raised negatively. The energy is flowing down and out, and they're experiencing black magic, black tantra. And there are many, many, many black magicians and many, many gurus who have done many such things and can do them today. Like I said, televangelists can do it. They can make people pass out, become overwrought emotionally, mentally, physically, and they pass out. Black magicians can manipulate energy in all sorts of ways. But can they raise kundalini and create a Christified master? No. No one has ever done that. No one can do that, because it is not a function. It is not a mechanical function. When we talk about the raising of the kundalini, we have to get out of our heads that we are working with a mechanical energy, and that we're just applying heat to it and causing it to rise up the thermometer like mercury in a thermometer. And then when it gets to the top, boom, we're enlightened. Doesn't work like that. We're not talking about the same thing. Kundalini rises with good works, with suffering and sacrifice for others, with comprehension and elimination of egos. Every degree that we earn in the supernal worlds is earned by our innermost being for works that they have done, for credits that they have earned, with the lords of karma and the white brotherhood. We are not, no one is awarded degrees in the supernal world based on any mechanical anything. It's conscious, it's divine. So people who say, you know, pay us a few $100s and we'll awaken your kundalini, come to our retreat, pay us a few $1,000s and we'll raise your kundalini or awaken your kundalini or do whatever. It's all 100% black magic bullshit. New age bullshit. It's contributing to your awakening and the great awakening of humanity, which is what our book is all about, which is coming out shortly. Benjamin says, well, that's good to know, whilst talking about degrees. Joanne thanks us for the link to the Rites of Rejuvenation. And Joanne says, I was following along though. And she said, Stuart Wilson, white moves first. Black can't do anything until the white makes the first move. Well, that's true. That is true. That is one thing that the white pieces can do, which the black pieces can't. Another way to say that is that the ego is reactive. Egos react. And we all know this. Kagamusha waved hello. Hello, Kagamusha. Tiffany says, laughing at Mercury retrograde, classic miss. What can the audience see? Laughing at Mercury retrograde, classic miss. What can the audience see? Okay, right. Okay, so Joanne says, I hear you. I have no partner, so I am out of luck. Well, no, so we shared with you what we shared. So, okay, so Joanne thanked us for that. And Azazel says, yeah, those right is ordered, but it's not a menu. Yes, it's not a a la carte. It's not like you pick and choose what you want. It's designed to be done as a group of practices, and there's meditation involved as well. So when you get into it and start practicing it, you will see how it all fits together. And she says, I was laughing at you when you lost your screen. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Now we figured that out. That's what it was, a classic Mercury retrograde, classic miss. Yes. Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground actually. But we still haven't gotten into the meat and potatoes. We now know what temptation really is all about. Okay. It's this colossal mess of spaghetti on the screen. Benjamin says, so anything bad deeds can attribute that to working against Kundalini. It's all the negative use of the sexual force. Okay, it's all the black pieces. It's all the ego. That's all the ego wants to do. The egos want our Kundalini, our sexual force, to flow down and out, to defeat us that way, through desire, to lord over us. Oh, what just happened there? To lord over us by desiring us, right? We explained this part. Hopefully you saw this one on the screen. Because our innermost king and queen, our divine mother Kundalini, and our innermost being, and the Holy Spirit, her husband, the husband of the Kundalini, that's Shiva Shakti, right? If it's Devi Kundalini Shakti, her husband is Shiva. That's the Holy Spirit. That's the masculine aspect. They are the two aspects of our innermost Christ as it descends on the tree of life down into us. The ego is there to steal that, right? To desire us. That's where we get the word desire. So anything that is based in desire, anything that gets us to indulge our desires, we are wasting our sexual energy. Those egos are essentially fornicating with us in whatever center that they're fornicating us with. They can fornicate with us in our mental center, in our emotional center, And of course, obviously, in our motor, physical, sexual centers, in our physical body. Giving into desires for food, desires for sex, for desires for, right? Benjamin says, oh, I see, thanks. The spirit is the king. That's where I was getting confused. Joanne says, this is a very sobering and wonderful teaching. I'm so grateful. Can't wait to learn more. Azazel says, those rites get us from crawling to walking. He's referring to the rites of rejuvenation. So this is the big picture, okay? And it all flowed out of, we began with this simple word, temptation, and the understanding that temptation comes from Latin, and that the root word tempt and temp means time and basically means degrees, temperature and degrees of time, degrees of temperature and degrees of time. And we saw how it was all a question of degree. And so too, temptation itself is a question of degrees. So what do we mean by that? Well, we said, for example, that egos can tempt us through bodily cravings and aversions, which we call desires. So, these are things like, food. When we say, let's be specific here. Obviously, drink. Well, let's, but it can also be drugs. It can be just about anything. Sensations. Experiences. There are many, many different things that we crave in life. But then those cravings can move into a different area, just like, sensations and drugs. Like, for example, we can have psychedelics, which give us very different experiences. They're not altogether physical experiences anymore, are they? Or physical sensations. So we get into the realm of metaphysical and then psychological cravings and aversions. But they can be related to physical. So, for example, we have the cravings for comfort, for security, but we can also have the craving for companionship. We can crave attention. Or we can have an aversion to attention, and what we crave is solitude. We just want to be left alone. Just leave me alone. I don't want to talk to anybody. So these are normally, when we think of temptations, these are what we, right? These are what we understand. So but when we observe the self-talk that we get or that we experience with some of these or all of these, depending on this situation, we discover that this is all well and good, but there is a modus operandi that the egos use. There are ways that egos get us to indulge in our cravings and aversions. And one way in which they do that is they can threaten. Now, how would an ego go about threatening us to attend to one of our cravings, to indulge one of our cravings? Like, what does that look like? Well, anybody who deals with the ego of fear knows that fear deals in threats all the time. It's called our fears, what we find threatening. So fear, so you may be familiar with this word. So phobias are those so-called irrational fears that we have, things that we shouldn't necessarily be afraid of, but fear makes them an object, an objective, they make them appear to be an objective threat to us, whereas there's nothing objective about it. But then there's other ways in which egos can threaten us. So if we desire companionship, pride might threaten us with the loss of companionship. You better look good. We better look good, otherwise nobody would like us. Nobody will like us. Right? So this is really reputation. The loss of a good reputation and the gaining of a bad reputation. So pride and narcissism comes in and says, what does everybody think about me? I need everybody to think about me a certain way, and it uses the threat of other people thinking ill about us or seeing us in a bad light. That's a threat. And you see how fear comes in there. We're afraid of that. And so this is why we said before that desire, lust, and fear are the mother and father of all egos, because there's always some self-preservation aspect involved in every ego, or a proliferation aspect of it. So the ego either wants to replicate itself and or shore itself up, protect itself, defend itself. And that singular, those two aspects, lust is proliferation and fear is protection. It's all self-preservation. The preserving of the false self, the construction and the shoring up and the proliferation and the protection of the false self. So threats are an aspect of that. Another way that egos tempt us is they make promises. Now, a promise, you could say that a threat is, if the threat is the stick, the promise is the carrot, right? If threatening is a stick, the promise is the carrot. You've probably heard that before, the carrot and stick approach. This is where, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. The ego is going to promise you a certain outcome, or it's going to get you to think about that certain outcome. The temptation is this carrot that's being dangled out in front of us in the future. And whether or not that ego is going to deliver on that carrot is completely irrelevant to the moment that we're in. Because the ego simply wants us to give in to its desired course of action. So it promises us the world if only we will sell our soul, right? That's Faust. It promises us good outcomes, outcomes that we want, even if those are good outcomes, or we think or we judge them to be good. So there are many, many people out there doing chaos magic, healing the sick and healing people from afar. They're using black magic to heal people. They're using black magic to perform miracles. And they think, they believe that they're doing good things because their egos have promised them that if you do all these good things, you're going to be in God's good graces. But they perform that black magic not in accordance with the law. And they are going against the great law of karma. They're throwing a monkey wrench in the works. We've described this. We've explained this in past podcasts. And they're causing so much more problems and chaos. That's why it's called chaos magic, by the way. Then they're solving. They might be healing somebody. They might be healing one person. But in the process of healing that person, they might be denying that person that individual's one opportunity that they had to comprehend and overcome a terrible demon that's been haunting them since childhood. And that demon that was now responsible for this illness, that it was only by going through this illness and seeing that illness through to its natural end that they could have overcame and comprehended the cause of that illness. But now this chaos magician comes along and heals them, removes all their symptoms. Didn't remove the demon, didn't remove the cause of the illness. Chaos magicians can't do that. They can't do that. They can only manipulate physical reality. So when they're wanting to go to do good and heal that person, they appear on the surface to have done something good. But below the surface, they have thrown a huge monkey wrench in the works, and who knows if the lords of karma and that individual's divine mother can devise another way for that individual to see and comprehend the demon within them that they have to comprehend and eliminate in order to reach the next degree, the next level of being. That person may remain in hell. They might be healthy, but they might be stuck in psychological hell now. So we must beware the promises that the Black Lodge make. Because there's another degree of this. There's another degree of temptation. And that degree is it's another it's promises to the next level. It's seduction. As Azil says, healthy. That's right. They might be healthy, but still in hell. So egos seduce us. Well, how do they seduce us? Well, all you got to do is look at, vampire movies and what are some of the ways that classical modalities of seduction, excuse me, um, you have things like flattery, um, without getting into all of the, um, but really flattery is a big one, and also there are many ways. It's just hard to put it into words, right? But we all know seduction when we experience it, and maybe we've seduced others in our day. We're trying to stay away from overtly sexual descriptions of seduction because it's not necessarily sexual that we're talking about right now. Although lust, of course, we all know how lust operates in order to get what it wants. And seduction is a big part of that. But yeah, so Stewart says, okay, so ego stroking, right? So like flattery is one such thing, but yeah, so let's write that down. Ego stroking. You're essentially you are paying homage to, or you are making them feel important and special, and that they are needed. But it's, of course, there's a falseness there. So it's when we're trying to think of an example which is not external but internal. So when an ego is seducing us from within, and the best one which we can perhaps share is the whole reason why we chose this topic for today anyway, to begin with, we should say. And that is, that we were working on our book, and this week we got a final copy of the manuscript, and there was this glaring problem with it, and several others, and the uh, the publisher had replaced all the images with screenshots because the file was too large and the file size needed to be reduced. And their actions were not very confidence inspiring. In fact, quite the reverse. And we had to respond to them and say, look, there has to be some contingencies for, we can understand having a smaller file size for the ebook, but we can't allow those low res images for the print version because they're going to look like hell in the actual printed book. They need to be at least 300 dpi, and any publisher worth their salt would know this, should know this. And you might say that our knowledge of the situation and our knowledge of publishing and our knowledge of these matters of high res versus low res and all this, um, we, on the one hand, we knew that this information had to get across to them, but on the other hand, we couldn't help but be seduced by this inner knowing that, and of having to take control of the situation and having to control the outcome. And what happened was, later on that day, we found ourselves having recurring thoughts around the questioning whether or not we went with the right publisher or not, and questioning whether or not, worried about what the final product is going to look like now, and what the next version of it that they're going to send us, or what the final product is going to look like. And we had lots of doubts and questions now bubbling up. And what's worse is, after a while of observing these questions and doubts around about the publisher, a new round of thoughts began bubbling up, and they were starting to doubt and question the book itself, what we wrote, and how it was going to be received, and how it was going to be. And we really found ourselves, by the end of the afternoon, from this morning, we found ourselves in a full-blown, like, almost in a now for us, it we weren't having a panic attack, but for us, it was, for us in our experience with fear and our it was akin to, like, if we were having a panic attack, because the thoughts just wouldn't stop. They just kept coming and coming and coming and coming. And this was this slow progression that started in the morning with what we might call fear, beginning with a seduction of, what better than those people, and you know and you have to take control of the situation. And it just started out in this little tiny, you know innocuous, and each pass, it became more dire and more this and more that, and then eventually it became, until it became, you know questioning the book itself. We talk about the alm of life all the time. We talk about the alm of life as this spiral, right? But there's the upward spiral, and then there's the downward spiral. And for us, we all know that what really matters in seduction, and why seduction is it's a and this ego stroking and flattery, and because we're all thinking about sexual seduction, we're all thinking about seduction in those terms. We're thinking about it in a qualitative sense, not a quantitative sense. Practically, what is a seduction? Seduction is, little by little, it's Chinese water torture. It's death by 1,000 cuts. That's what seduction is. It's this downward spiral. Seduction is, you can't go all in guns a-blazing, right? You can't just take the person you're attracted to, grab them, throw them down on the sofa, right? And go to third base, right? You can't do that. Everybody knows you can't do that. There needs to be a dance. There needs to be a progression. You have to go little by little. You get them to first base, and then to second base, then to third base before you go for the home run, right? To use the sexual allegory. But we have to get away from that allegory when we deal with our egos internally, because I was being seduced by fear. And fear doesn't seduce sexually. Not internally, it doesn't. Neither does pride. Neither does gluttony. What does gluttony do? How does gluttony seduce us? Gluttony seduces us. Oh, you just have one. Just have one. You've earned it. You deserve it. You were good. You worked out this morning. You went for your run. You went for your walk. You did your weights. You did whatever. Oh, come on. You can, it's nothing. It's just, you've earned it. You deserve it. You were really good. You'll just won't have your snack later tonight, or you'll eat a little bit less at dinner. Go ahead. Have that little bite. Just take a bite. Just one bite. Right? This is seduction. This is gluttony seducing us. Why? Because we all know once we have that one bite, you open up that bag of Doritos, and you just have one. Even the advertising says you can't have one. You open up a bag of crisps or chips or whatever you call them in whatever country you're in, or a bag of Doritos or whatever. You can't just have one. Or maybe you can. Maybe you have an iron will. But there's so many different things like this if we observe in our life. And what we shared with you was not a bag of chips. It wasn't chocolate. It wasn't anything like that. It was fear seducing us with just that little thing at the beginning of an obvious thing, which was based in fact. It was based in truth. And we did have to take charge of that situation. But our demon, our fear, managed to wiggle its way in there because it was worried about what the ultimate outcome was going to be, and how ultimately people were going to be judging the quality of the images in the book and the professionalism of the book, and how it was going to look, how it was going to make us look, and how it was going to make the whole project seem in the eyes of the critics. So we were worried about, right, reputation. We were worried about the attention we were going to get. We were worried about security. We were concerned about all sorts of things. And these were threatening in that sense. So some of these can combine. Promises and threats and seduction can work together. And when threat and seduction works together, we have a word for that, It's called coercion. We spell that right? Coercion. Yes, maybe. Or promises and seduction can work together. And before we know it, just like our gluttony says to us, oh, just have one Dorito. Just have a couple. You've earned it. And so you open up the bag and you sit down, you have a couple, and before you know it, 3/4 of the bag is gone. Before you know it, you're down here in the downward spiral, right? That's what seduction is. And then there's lots of people, and probably lots of women, who can relate to this, right? Being in the back seat of someone's car or on the sofa or whatever, and just starting out, just making out. Oh, I'm just going to make out with them. And then before too long, things are at third base. And you promised yourself, you swore that you were just going to make out with them. Or you promised yourself, you swore you were just going to have a handful of Doritos, or a couple teaspoons of ice cream, or a couple chocolate covered almonds, or whatever. Or I'm going out tonight, but I'm not going to drink. I'm going to go out and maybe 2 drinks. That's it, maximum 2 drinks. But when does this happen inside of us, internally? How our egos tempt us. What does it mean? It means degrees. And just like that spiral, just like the hands on the clock, egos are clever. The ego doesn't go straight to 6 o'clock. No, it's going to go 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5, right? It's going to go by degrees. The mercury doesn't jump from 0 to 100. It progresses through degrees. Temptation is the movement of energy and consciousness through these degrees as egos play through the act of desiring our being and getting us to not be. Temptation is the movement through degrees from a state of being to a state of not being through this thing we call desire or being desired. That's actually better. And the other word we have for that is conditioned. This is the human condition. And whether it's threats, promises, seduction, coercion, we have to be aware and cognizant of the ways in which the ego inches along. Because remember, the alm of life of evolution and devolution is the same pattern. Now, sometimes it can go very quickly and things can escalate or de-escalate, right, very quickly. You can go from being mildly annoyed to bursting out in all-out rage, right, in a very short period of time if you're very mercurial, or if you have anger management issues or whatever. It's possible to have the alm of life, things spiral out of control very, very rapidly, very quickly, no question. But make no mistake, things are spiraling out of control. You are falling into temptation as you are falling into the downward spiral of that, explosion of anger, if that's what we're talking about. But I was going through the downward spiral of fear, and it was slow motion. It was in slow motion. It took all day, from morning all the way to the afternoon, slowly, one little revolution after another. First it was this, then it evolved into that, then it got me questioning the whole publisher, then it got me and then finally it got to the point where the fear could actually turn its attention in on myself and on the book and on the book which was dictated to me by my being, by Attlas, and started putting the self-doubt. So for us, it took all day. It was an entire day of seduction. And it was only became cognizant and really clear to us that the demon, fear, was screwing with us, was seducing us, and really trying to get to us, until the thoughts about us started showing up. right? As long as it was about the publisher and as long as it was about the work, when that was objective fact, that was true, that was all true, the wool was over our eyes. I freely admit it. I didn't realize I was being seduced by my fear until that fear tried to get to third base. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, hey, hang on a second. What the hell's going on now? Where's all this shit coming from? Well, where it was coming from was from this morning. Because third base doesn't come out of nowhere. We only got to third base because we went through first and second. We have to be aware of this. We have to be cognizant of this. And we have to recognize how subtle, how clever, and how insidious our egos can be. Because lots of times we think to ourselves, oh, I have temptation under control. Do you though? I certainly know moving forward that I have to be that much more vigilant at how clever and how subtle the fear is. And it's the comprehension of temptation as degrees. And because it's so, that's when the egos get their foothold, right? They get their foot in the door. That's exactly how I described it to somebody who I was relaying my experience to yesterday over the phone. And I said, my fear got its foot in the door in the morning. Just it opened the door just a crack, but it stuck its foot in the door. And I didn't notice that crack in the door was there and that my demon got his foot in the door. And then slowly throughout the rest of the day, he was opening the door, one little degree at a time, slowly by degrees. It's just like a 2-year-old dealing with a parent, right? Pushing the limits, nudging it a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And then they go a little bit more. And each time they want to, that's seduction. That is seduction. This is what we have to comprehend about seduction and the modus operandi of egos. Because sometimes we think we're going to catch that ego in the moment, but sometimes that ego has momentum. And we don't realize that ego has been building and building and building and building, and it's been seducing us for hours, maybe days, maybe weeks. And then what's the straw that breaks the camel's back? What is the circumstance, the triggering event, or the triggering word that suddenly that ego, we're completely overwhelmed, and we say something or we do something, and afterwards we're like, oh, what possessed me to do that? Or where the hell did that come from? Like we did on Friday. It was later in the afternoon where these thoughts started coming up, and all of a sudden we were like being gripped by fear and self-doubt and anxiety about the contents of the book. And we're like, where the hell did this come from? And immediately we were like, because we were observing ourselves and we were conscious enough to remember in retrospect and say, that's where it came from. It came from this morning. It came from the little mini doubts that we had in the graphical fidelity of the book, and then the doubts which spread to the questioning our decision to go with that publisher. And now the doubt had spread to self-doubt and the questioning the contents of the book and whether or not this whole thing is a folly and an exercise of just sheer lunacy, and that, right? But we caught ourselves in the moment. Okay, where the hell are these thoughts coming from? Well, they were coming from hours earlier. That's where they're coming from. They were coming from here. When they were tiny and minuscule and had nothing to do with me. They had everything to do with the book, but you see, but it was somebody else's fault, right? It was a mistake that somebody else had made. And me having to take control of the situation to fix those mistakes, right? Me having to have control. And then that same desire for control up here now is coming out down here as a full-blown terror and anxiety that I have no control. You see that? Right? The same desire to control up here now is the realization and the terror that I have no control. I have no control over how people will take the book, receive the book, accept the book. I have no control over that. This is seduction. And this is a modus operandi that, again, we all think that we understand and we all think that we know, because we all think that we're experts and masters at seducing sexually. But there was nothing sexual about what was going on with me on Friday. There was nobody else involved. And for myself, I know I can't have one Dorito. I know I can't have just one. And not just because, as Azazel says, because of the honest advertising in the commercials. I know I can't have, because I know myself. And I know that I don't have the willpower just to have one. I know I'll eat the whole bag. That's just something that's just, that's my weakness. I've told you guys that before. I don't smoke, I don't drink, but food and junk food and that kind of stuff, that's my drug. That's my copium. I know that. I know that about myself. And I know that those Doritos I know that I can have one celery stick. I know I can have one apple. I know I can have a handful of grapes. But I know that I can't, I'm helpless against the scientifically designed to be hyper palatable and hyper addictive stuff that they put on Doritos. I know that that it's like all but impossible for me just to have one, and I'll eat the whole bag. So we have to know these things about ourselves, but we also have to know the mechanisms, because it is mechanistic, it is mechanical, but it is not wholly altogether unconscious. It's not insentient. It's not that kind of mechanicity. There's a kind of sentience to it, and they're clever, they're crafty, they're insidious, and we have to comprehend, we have to understand seduction on its objective qualitative scale, not just subjective objective quantitative scale, not just its subjective qualitative aspects. We have to divorce in our minds seduction from sexuality. Even though ultimately this is all sexual and it's all about the sexual force and sexual energy. Okay? But there's nothing particularly sexually seductive about how fear goes about seducing us, or gluttony for that matter. Again, we want to be able to recognize these patterns so that we can catch ourselves and know for ourselves, instead of asking yourselves, what possessed me to do that? Or where the hell did that come from? We can say, oh, okay, that's where that came from. And that will help us expand the scope and breadth of our analysis, conscious awareness of our defects and vices, our egos, and how they go about manipulating us and how they get us to where they want to be, which is like every seduction, like any seduction. Okay, they want to get the home plate. They want to hit a home run. And take that for the allegorical symbolic meaning of what that means. First base, second base, third base, home run. Our egos want to hit a home run with us. They want to fornicate with us. They want to get all of our sexual energy and get our consciousness. And for that, they want us to indulge them in all the ways that they want us to indulge them. They want to have their way with us. And so they will go through this process of seduction, this slow, patient, methodical, to get their foot in the door. They'll start just by, gently, like Stuart said, caressing our egos, right? Just gently stroking or caressing us with what they can get away with. And then they'll move to the next thing and the next thing. Oh, did they get away with that? Can they get away with the next thing? Well, then the next time they'll try a little bit more and a little bit more. This is the key to seduction. It's the Aum of life in reverse. And if you look at people caught in the downward spiral, you know that people don't start out on any addiction. People don't start out mortgaging their house. People begin with a gambling addiction, for example, just going in and playing a few slots. And the next time they go and they play a few more. And the next time they go play a few more. And then, and they get caught in the downward spiral. Nobody starts out drinking 12 bottles of vodka. If they do, they'll die of alcohol poisoning. They start out drinking one too many. One too many. So this is why Master Samael said, we have to be as vigilant as a guard in a time of war. Where's our... we have to be that watchful and observant and patient and relaxed. Right? If we really want true peace, we must learn how to live like a guard in times of war, always alert and vigilant, with a quick and flexible mind, because peace is not a matter of romantic fantasies or beautiful daydreams. And we wrote this. We didn't write this. We designed this meme to show the downward spiral here in reverse, right? But here it's consciousness that's becoming bottled up. It's because as we fall into the downward spiral, consciousness gets bottled up and shrinks. And here the consciousness is becoming lost in romantic fantasies and beautiful daydreams. In this downward spiral, as the consciousness goes down the toilet, right? It's spiraling down the toilet, swirling down the toilet. That's what happens when we face seduction without being alert and ready and vigilant, because we never know when it might be too late for us to snap out of it, for us to wake up and realize what's going on. Like so many, let's just, like so many young women who ended up with unwanted pregnancies, or who ended up losing their virginity in the backseat of an automobile because they weren't vigilant. They couldn't see the writing on the wall. They allowed themselves to become seduced. And when the moment came when they finally realized what was going on and how precipitously things were going, suddenly it was too late. They were too far gone. Things had gotten out of hand. This is what we have to be really concerned about and really vigilant of when we comprehend and observe ourselves when it comes to egos and their seduction and how they seduce us. And it's like so many different people who they will look back on their life and they'll say, I didn't, like politicians, who end up getting thrown out of office for corruption, they will tell you, I never went into politics. I had no intention of becoming corrupt or of doing anything criminal. It just sort of crept up on me. You start a little bit here and a little bit, and before you know it, you're like you're up to your eyeballs in corruption, because it's always these little baby steps that get us there. So threats are kind of easy to catch. Promises, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right? Like, what's the catch? What's the fine print? We have egos like making promises to us. Oh, don't worry, you do this, do that, indulge this, indulge. Everything will be fine. Everything will be okay. And we fall for those all the time as well. But they're a little less insidious. They're a little less clever, a little less subtle. But seduction and what we're describing, we freely admit, even on Friday, getting suckered in ourselves. Now, again, for us, it was a big deal. It was a big enough deal that we dedicated today's live stream to it. And it was a big enough deal that we allowed the truth of temptation to spend, over 2 hours talking about the relationship of temptation to degrees, and how temptation, the word temptation, cannot be divorced from the word degree. And that when you look at the most insidious, the most clever, and when you look over the long term, how people become bona fide awakened demons. Nobody sets out to become a demon. Even those people out there that people say, though, these evil people in the world, but a lot of those people believe that they're doing good. They're being seduced. They're being seduced. And many of them are being coerced. And it's only a question of degree. To what degree? This is temptation. And hopefully, by the end of today, you have a widened appreciation and perspective of what temptation is. And that this will help you in your self-observation as you observe the forces of desire within you that are trying to shift you from being to not being in degrees, little by little. Because Rome wasn't built in a day. And the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And each and every day, there's that allegory of the two wolves, the white wolf and the dark wolf. When they ask you which is stronger, and they say, which one do you feed every day? A little bit, little by little. Which one grows? It's the one that you feed. So when we talk about the line of life and the level of being, we talk about degrees, okay? In reality, we're going to be doing this, but we want to be trending up. We want to be trending up. Tiffany says, thank you, great piece. And she says, hope to catch you soon. So we imagine you're probably needing to go. We've been at this for over 3 hours. So at this time, we'll open it up to questions or comments or anything anyone wants to say or share. If you need to go, then thank you for joining us. We hope to see you again soon. We hope you found this valuable. We hope you learned something. And we'll share this incredible mess of a whiteboard here. And what if we, can we grab this? See if we can grab this part. Will it let us? Yeah, it'll let us do that. Move this over here, maybe. It's not going to make it any easier to see. Okay. People have been asking, people have asked us if we can make these available. And, you know, we've always had in our mind that we really should clean them up somehow or something, but we just, for whatever reason, we never get around to it. We've been so busy with this book publishing and everything else. We have other, I've had other things to do. But maybe we will, we'll do so. We should probably save this under a better file name. We'll call it Temptation in Degrees. How's that? Why did it pop up? There. So we have a few of these, right? We've had a few of these that anyway, we'll see about what might be the best way to share these. Okay, Joanne says, my heart is humbled and enriched with knowledge. Looking forward to going back over the entire podcast from the beginning to catch everything. Can't wait for the book to come out. Neither can we at this point. We're just hoping it comes out and looks good. She said the details and the nuance you have brought to this subject is very educational. Thank you. You're most welcome, Joanne. And thank you. And you know what? It was great to have you here. We're glad that you caught it live. But as always, it's always available on YouTube unless YouTube decides to take it down for whatever reason. But we haven't said any or done anything particularly contentious today, so we don't think there's any risk or harm of it being removed. But it was great to have you join us, and hopefully we'll see you again next week. And hopefully we will have good news about the availability of the book. And there might be something else for us to report when it comes to temptation. There might be another interesting anecdote for us to share, but that's currently playing out, and we'll see how that unfolds in the coming days and the coming weeks. So, but that might be, it's also related to temptation. Have been some promises made, no threats, but there have been some promises made. So we'll just drop that, well, plant that seed. Hopefully that'll be enough intrigue to keep everybody coming back to maybe have a sequel to today's talk on temptation, and get another anecdote under our belt to understand the nuances of this particular phenomenon at play in our lives and in our world. Anyone have any other questions or comments to make before we call it a day here? Suffice it to say, things are potentially getting more intense, and well, maybe getting, what's the word? We don't use the wrong word here. Grandiose? No. Consequential. Kagemusha. We love that name, by the way, and we love your avatar there. That's it brings us back to our time living in Japan. So Kagemusha says great content and it resonates. We're glad that it does, Kagemusha, and we hope to see you again. Hope to see you again soon. Anyone else? Any comments, questions, anything at all? We thought today was pretty comprehensive and pretty clear, so we wouldn't be surprised if you didn't have questions. But on the other hand, we don't want to. We like to give everybody a chance to type furiously. We know that not everybody can touch type, so some people have to, especially if you're on a phone, you might be plucking away on your with your thumbs or whatever. But yes, things are in play that may be taking matters to a more intense and more consequential level. But look, we're taking a page out of the playbook of masters like Count Saint Germain, and Kagemusha gives us a fist bump here. Might appreciate that there have been many masters who have walked into the lion's den through the ages, including masters of like Master Beethoven. And Stuart is tempting your audience with a sequel. Funny, funny. Yes, we're dangling a carrot for the future, right, Stuart? Seducing our audience with promises for the future. Benjamin says that he typed something, but it didn't show. And Azazel says, upcoming IKEA product, assemble a god. Just read the manual. Joanne says, I have been seeking for this for a long time. I didn't know what it was called or where to start, but I am very pleased to start here and grow. Very inspiring. Well, Joanne, that's very kind words, and it warms our heart to know that you you found here something that you've been looking for and longing for, and that warms our heart, and that it's very gratifying to us. That's the word we're looking for. Benjamin says it. Anyways, it was Ephesians 6:12. Well, guess what, Benjamin? For your benefit, we are going to, because we have the ability to do so. We just have to remember just to bring it up on screen. Ephesians 6:12. We're just going to read the first one. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Very apropos. Thank you for sharing that, Benjamin. That was maybe like the perfect topper, the perfect capper to today's. Let's read another one. This is what NIV is, new something version, right? New International Version. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Where's the King James Version? We got to read that one. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So there you go. And yeah, very apropos to what we were talking about today in terms of temptation, and that it's very easy for us to be led astray and or distracted by the temptations of the flesh, and say that we have temptation under control because we can control our gluttony, or we can control our lust, or we can control whatever, right? But I mean, that's Benjamin, thank you for sharing that, because it's right there in black and white. The temptation is degrees, and it's questions of degrees. No, absolutely, Benjamin. And so remember that, and remember that Desire means to desire. And if you can knock someone off their throne, you take their place. To dethrone someone, right, is to take their place. And that's what the egos want. That's what makes them principalities. And the wickedness in high places. When we talk about high places, what higher place is there than the throne? Than our innermost Lord, our inner God, our innermost being? What higher place is there than the top of the mountain, the top of the hill? And that's why we play that game as a kid, right? King of the Hill. You go and you push the person off the top, and what do? You take their place, because that's what you want, to be the king of the hill. And that's what all the egos want. And that's what desire is, to desire, to supplant the ruler, to supplant the king and the queen, take their place. This is the Game of Thrones. We've talked about that before. How Game of Thrones, what the whole mythos around Game of Thrones, what everybody was so obsessed over, that essentially medieval fantasy version of Dallas or Dynasty. It was a soap opera set in a medieval fantasy world. But what everybody was so obsessed over was the fact that there was this constant jockeying for position over this iron throne, the kingdoms of Westeros, in this constant, never-ending struggle for the iron throne. We're living in the Iron Age, and the Iron Throne is made up of all of these iron weapons of all of these rulers and kings who had sat in the throne before it. And in fact, the actual Iron Throne from the book sits on a mountain of swords, the mountain of iron. It's much more dramatic, much more intense, and epic than it was actually depicted in the HBO series. So there's this epic struggle of the principalities of our higher and lower nature, and the wickedness wants to assume, to desire and assume that role, and they do it in degrees, step by step, little by little. They scheme and they do all these things, and it's those degrees that we need to understand and comprehend. That is the true nature of temptation. The little by little, the inching away, the chipping away at the armor, the getting the foot in the door, and all the other analogies and allegories that you can bring to bear on the metaphysical reality of that, but also how you can now understand and comprehend better your own experience of yourself, and how your own defects and vices seek to rule you, your individual personal kingdom of Westeros, your Iron Throne. Because that's what this is all about. That's why this lecture, like so many others, was labeled a practical one, not just esoteric, and not just, mystical or whatever, or academic or theoretical. This is practical, rubber meets the road kind of stuff. That's why you're here. That's why we're here. We'll let others, the theologians and the ones who have a memory for names and places and all that stuff. There's lots of other resources online for you to go to for that stuff. You're here, and we're here for you, for this rubber meets the road kind of practical, hands-on, metaphysical, scientific knowledge that you can apply in your life, so that you can awaken and self-realize. And then the rest, once you have access to the Akashic records, you can read tomes and study to your heart's content, right? But in the meantime, let's help you get there. Thank you all for being here. You've gotten this far, and that's a good step. It's a good step in the right direction, if we may say so as well. And we hope that another good step in the right direction will be the release of our book, which we hope will be happening sooner rather than later, and without too much drama and too many additional obstacles. But the one on Friday, it yielded much fruit, because it yielded this talk, and this process that we went through today yielded much just by going through that process. And so everything happens for a reason. And this too was for a reason. So we're glad that you came. We hope to see you again soon. If you have anything else to ask or share, please do so now. And then otherwise we'll be saying goodbye. Joanne says, do you have a general time frame for when it will be available for purchase? Are we months away still? No. We're not months away. We're at most weeks away. And we dare say we hope it's only days away. Honestly. So it's not really in our hands. We recorded the audiobook. The audiobook is in the can. It's being worked on as we speak. We've now have a final version of the manuscript back into them. So really it's a matter of, it needs to be formatted, and it needs just whatever that publication process. It could be 10 days, could be 14 days, could be 20 days. We dare say we hope it'll be before Christmas. Joanne says, oh my goodness, that is good news. Congratulations. And I know this is going to lead to something incredible. On that note, we will say, so be it. So be it. So be it. Not our words, Joanne's words, but so be it. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you for that, the vote of confidence. Thank you all for being here. I see people are beginning to check out. So we hope to see you again soon. And until then, take care of yourselves and observe yourselves, remember your Divine Mother. And as always, inferential peace. We'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone.